Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Montgomery, and this is my colleague, Tracy Priest.
Hello, everybody.
And we're with The Road to Retail. On our podcast, Tracy and I hope to offer tips, insights, ideas, and examples for how small, emerging, and challenger CPG, consumer packaged goods, brands can build their business. Everything from determining if you're ready to grow, where to start, how to prove it online, or how to go about securing distribution at a national retailer, driving your business through to the end consumer, or how to go about finding an investor if you're ready for that aspect. Bottom line is we would love to help you be successful by highlighting the many important aspects of this journey to establishing and growing your brand. Tracy and I have been doing this a long time. We've made a lot of mistakes, and we've done a few good things, so we're here to help you. Please follow our podcast on iTunes or Spotify, leave us a review, and consider sharing the show with a friend or colleague that may benefit from the content. Tracy?
Bruce and I have been involved in consumer packaged goods commercial operations roles for over 30 years. We define commercial operation functions relating to sales, marketing, trade marketing, broker and distributor management, agency selection and management, new product development, brand acquisition and divestitures, and customer management. We also invite on our episodes friends and former colleagues from all aspects of the Road to Retail process to come on the show and offer their opinions and experience. Again, we encourage you to subscribe to our iTunes or Spotify channel at Road, 2 Retail.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to our most recent episode of Road to Retail. Hello, Bruce. Good to see you again. Why don't
Tracy, good to see you.
Tell us a little bit about who our guest is today.
We got a great guest today. We have Rusty Ray, managing partner at Alantra, an investment banking firm. Rusty, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here. Great to see you, Tracy. Great to see you, Bruce.
No, thank you for the time. So, Rusty, we're going to talk about what he sees on his desk, helping companies and brands buy and sell, what they look for in brands, what his clients look for. And Rusty, before we jump into the discussion, why don't you give a little bit about your background, your firm, and how you've come to sit in the chair you're in today?
Yeah, sure. So kind of start from the top. Alantra is a middle market investment banking firm with a heritage starting in Europe. U.S. is a relatively new territory for us, so excited to be part of the team and growing the business here. We cover healthcare broadly, but where I've spent most of my time and mostly excited about has always been consumer health. I just love the mix of the regulatory, the effectiveness of pharmaceutical products, but still sold through the consumer channel. So you have this nice marketing angle too that it creates a really interesting dynamic around products. And it's putting health into the consumer's hand, which I think we all agree we want to do. And they're just fun to be around, because many of these brands that we've worked with, you grow up with, and you think like, I helped transition this brand, and this is probably sitting in millions of people's medicine cabinets. So it's kind of fun to think about.
Yeah, no, Rusty, it's interesting. I'm not sure I've heard many people ever say they enjoy the regulatory aspect of the business. A lot of the times there's maneuvering around that, and some bad words get said when they get notices from the regulators. But welcome to the show, and we're looking forward to this today. Tracy, why don't you kick us off?
Absolutely. So, Rusty, first, let's talk about what the evolution of small emerging brands has been, since your time in the space, and maybe talk about some of the brands that came out of, COVID that were really hot, on Amazon, and then also the role of, brick and mortar.
Yeah, interesting question, a big question. So maybe I'll even just kind of start pre-COVID to set some context. It was really interesting starting, I would say, probably around 2006, 2007, when we did some of our very first carve-outs from Novartis, back when they had a consumer health business. It's it's a place where, it's ripe for investment by private equity. It has all the boxes to check. You've got opportunities for M&A. You've got competitive moats because of the regulatory and compliance and supply. It's complex. And, to be quite frank, OTC consumer health, traditional OTC, I should say, has grown 3, 4, 5% every year like clockwork. That combined with the ecosystem, like people like Bruce out in the market, and sort of asset-light model has sort of created this really interesting dynamic where, you can sort of buy tail brands or start emerging brands much more cheaply than was previously possible. And I think, that's I feel like that's when it really started to take off, was sort of the early 2000s, and started to gain steam as people were building platforms with older brands, et cetera, and building big companies. And we saw some incredible exits. The multiples were eye-popping, and so people took notice. So I think you just had a lot more folks entering the kind of consumer health space, even before COVID. So kind of the run up to COVID, I think it's always been really exciting. And then COVID hit, and we just had a really different dynamic around consumer health. There were times when, if you were trying to buy anything cough, cold, or immune related, it was flying off the shelf. Couldn't keep it on. You had a lot of people staying at home, seeing some of these trends coming from a consumer background and starting to develop their own brands, which was really exciting. And frankly, it was kind of easy is the wrong word, but it was easy-ish in the sense that, a single individual could think about a brand concept, outsource, some of the marketing, Amazon, et cetera. Think about, a contract manufacturer and supply, and just sort of pull it together. And with very little capital, you could launch a brand on Amazon, and lots of people did.
Yep.
And, they did that, in kind of a DTC fashion as well. Where I saw a lot of really cool brands, many of them did not make it, but that's not to say they weren't interesting or cool or solving a problem, was things around women's health. Super exciting because women's health is still undefined at best. If you go into the drugstore, you're talking about period care or pain. I mean, it's not really defined. So you saw a lot of women entrepreneurs start these businesses that were targeting unique aspects of a woman's life cycle, whether it's menopause, premenopause, postnatal, prenatal, other types of products that were geared toward a very specific time in a woman's life. And we saw some really exciting brands come out of that. The thing that I noticed, and this was also a bit of a detriment to some of these brands, is these brands were beautiful, well merchandised, the packaging was amazing, clean label, just phenomenal. And as a result, they were really expensive. And so while they did really well on DTC, and they maybe got a little bit of a following, they maybe got some print, some airtime, and all of a sudden, they bump from, doing a few $100,000 in net sales to all of a sudden doing, say, 4 or 5 million. A lot of them stopped right there, because as COVID tailed off, and people thought, oh, Amazon's the future. It's all Amazon. It's all DTC. Retail's dead. Turns out retail's not dead. And,
Right.
People do still want to shop. And so I think a lot of people have realized, like, you have to meet the consumer where they are, whether that's online, digital, in the store, in mass, in club, in grocery. You have to meet the consumer where you are. And so many of these brands that started during COVID, while they were awesome and really cool and great concepts, they were too expensive. If you have a $30, $40 supplement, it's very hard to put that on CVS shelf and sort of think about, like, gosh, how am I going to support that, et cetera. I would say also, many of the folks that kind of launch these brands were launching it with a digital first strategy. And, that I think that's everybody was learning simultaneously what worked and how to be successful in digital. I think, for an entrepreneur, taking that strategy and saying, okay, my marketing, my sales, my digital initiatives, and then turning that into retail to grow a brand on shelf, that's a different skill set, and really hard and frankly really expensive. So we saw a lot of small brands that I wish could have broken out, but they kind of hit a wall when they sort of hit that 3, 4, $5 million sales level because they just simply weren't able to turn into retail and become kind of a bigger force in the market, even though they could have. So that's kind of a trend that I saw, and we're still kind of seeing it play out today. A lot of small brands are out there looking for capital because they're starting to reevaluate their strategy, trying to make the push into retail, maybe launching a less expensive SKU, et cetera. But the problems kind of remain that to be a brand today, to be an emerging brand coming out of COVID, you do need to be omni, and it's just a different challenge. So
Yeah, great insight. Thanks for sharing that, Bruce.
So Rusty, as you think about your position where you help companies buy or sell or founders sell, let's first start with what counsel do you give a buyer that might be thinking of purchasing a long neglected or dormant brand out of a larger company? So what actions do these new buyers need to be prepared to take in order to increase the odds of success? And I would ask Rusty, maybe explain to the group, for those who don't know, what a tail brand is before you dive into this. I think a lot of people think, oh, I've heard of that brand, I'll buy it, and magically it'll grow like crazy. And then you pull it out from fill in the blank, General Mills, Procter, Unilever. Oops, a little harder than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a layup. It does feel like a layup, and I do get that perspective from a lot of people because they've known the brand for since they were a kid, and they think, oh, it's got such great heritage, like it just needs some attention and it's going to grow. So I think as someone trying to buy a brand, I think first thing is do your homework. Big pharma, now big consumer, they don't like to waste time with people that are quote unquote learning. If you walk in and say, hey, I'd like this brand, or have a perspective, do your homework. And to answer your question about a tail brand, what does that mean? I mean, a tail brand can be lots of things. As we think about larger companies like a Haleon or Kenvue or Bayer or whatever, you think about their marquee brands like Advil and Tylenol and some of these household names. These are multi-billion-dollar businesses, and they take a lot of resources and attention from the company. What people maybe aren't as keenly aware of is there's a lot of small brands that these companies have acquired through mergers, acquisitions, consolidation over the years that still may be sizable, still may have heritage. You may recognize the brand name, but they're no longer core to the operating company. So a brand we sold, for example, Bruce, I know you and I interacted with this on some years ago, but a brand that was a household name many years ago was Breathe Right, which is a nasal strip. That became non-core to GSK at the time, largely because it was sub $100 million in net sales, and they just had different strategies and different focus areas on other categories. So as brands become non-core, a couple things happen. They start to lose support, meaning they lose marketing and selling support. So the brand is obviously going to shrink because you have to be in front of the consumer. And if you're not, you're going to decline. The other thing that happens is even though the brand is still doing very well, it's throwing off a lot of cash and very beneficial to the company, think about the people inside the company, GSK or Bayer or wherever, if they're told this is non-core, their attention is elsewhere. Their attention is on the marquee brands. So not only is it starved for resources from a dollar perspective, it starves for resources from an innovation and thought leadership perspective. And that's when you see brands really start to decline. And they become sort of small brands that kind of live on shelf, not a lot of support. They're there because they have a lot of heritage. But don't have a lot of innovation and are just simply not growing. So that's how I would characterize kind of your classic tail brand. And they can be of a wide range of sizes. I mean, there's tail brands that are a couple $1 million in sales. There are tail brands that are nearly 100 or, even bigger in sales, which is sort of funny to think about. Um, but what makes someone successful in acquiring those and how I would evaluate that brand is, one, if you're going to initiate a conversation with a potential seller, is do your homework, be prepared, be ready to move quickly and make it as easy and painless for them as possible. Don't come to them and say you need some long transition services agreement, some long manufacturing services agreement, because if you think about the problem that you're likely to solve by taking this brand out of their portfolio, you're reducing complexity, and you're making their lives easier. So you don't want to add to that complexity by creating a deal that just balloons that effort, and it takes a lot of resources internally for the seller to sort of manage that process over a number of years. The other thing that I think people get a little bit lost in when they see a brand is they may not sort of look past the brand name, right? It's is this a good brand, and why? And you think about what is the heritage of the brand? Does it still have awareness? Is it still relevant? And awareness is incredibly valuable. It took tens and tens of millions of dollars to build. And so, don't underestimate that, even the brand that's kind of small, fallen out of favor, maybe was on your grandmother's medicine cabinet, but, people remember that brand, and that's sort of the basis. I think a lot of people can think they can reinvigorate something because there's an underlying awareness. The other thing I think people should think about is what category is it sitting in? Is it a category that's changed? Is the landscape changed? Is the dynamic change where it's going to be harder to grow that? There's new entrants, there's new formats, where your brand, despite its heritage and long-standing clinical claims, maybe it's not going to be successful because the category's changed, or the category shifted. So I would look at category trends and kind of figure out how the brand fits into that and how it can grow. Then I start to think about, okay, margin. There's lots of brands out there that are low margin, and you think about, oh well, this is a great brand. It's doing a lot in revenue. It's got good distribution. But if you think about something that's sort of 50% gross margin, maybe it's got a lower profitability level, it makes it really hard to reinvigorate something, because when you go to reinvigorate something, that means investing in marketing, selling, advertising, etc. So you almost have to over-index on some of those costs, and you just need to make sure that you have enough margin there to be successful and not sort of run out of money, so to speak. Because a lot of these tail brands, because they're no longer supported, the gross to net tends to expand, because the retailers, want more to keep it on shelf. A lot of people make the false assumption that when they buy it and they start investing, and the brand maybe starts to stabilize and growing again, that gross to net starts to shrink. That doesn't happen as quickly as people think. So I would just say be prepared to invest heavily behind the brand for a good period of time, before you're going to start to see that turn. So in order to do that, make sure that the brand is inherently profitable, so that you're not sort of investing fresh capital into something that the brand can support itself. So those are the kinds of things I think about when trying to pull a brand out of a larger corporate.
Yeah, Rusty, I would add just one more thing before I hand it back to Tracy. I think another watch out that Tracy and I have seen when we give counsel to these, if they're a private equity group or a smaller strategic that maybe hasn't bought lots of brands before, is they have to watch out that some of the tail brands inside a big company, let's just keep using the one you said, a Kenvue, those brands are protected by the whole joint business planning process of Kenvue with the retailers. So your trade expectations of trade spend investment might not be as low as they are under Kenvue. And if you have an item that's not hitting velocity hurdles, it might be safe only because it's part of that greater negotiation. But the minute that product is pulled out of Kenvue and put in the Rusty Tracy Bruce company, the rules may change.
Absolutely.
So for people to go and calculate that they're going to only have the same just to use one example, trade spend expectation as Kenvue is really risky to make that assumption.
For
Really
sure,
risky.
for sure. And then you also have to think about logistics and distribution. A Kenvue is going to be able to do it much cheaper than most folks can. So, your carrying costs are just going to be a lot more expensive. So, for sure, you got to take all those into consideration. Absolutely.
Exactly. Tracy?
Yeah, so let's shift a little bit from tail brands to just you've got a buyer that's coming to you and they're looking to buy a brand. So what kind of things do you look for, Rusty, in a brand that you would recommend? What gives you confidence that this is a brand that can last and that's got a bright future?
Um, I think, I think it does go back to heritage. If it's a tail brand, I think don't underestimate heritage. I think what excites me about, a tail brand that is as a potential acquisition is what's innovation look like, right? Are you just going to keep the same old format, year after year? And, I think you'll find that, your growth may be curtailed. So what's the possibility for innovation? And it doesn't have to be a blockbuster innovation, but are there new formats? If you have a pill, can you do a gel cap? Could you do a gummy? Where is consumer sentiment heading, and can you meet that?
Good
Also,
point.
I think the other is, how does the brand look? You think about some of these brands, especially, within pharma, that have been traded around. I mean, the packaging looks like it's from 1970. So how do you refresh, use that to elevate awareness within the consumer, et cetera? I mean, I think you can do that a lot easier now than you could, say, 10 years ago, where, you were reliant on print and TV and things like that. Digital is so much more effective and cheaper. So, that's how I think about, what might be a good brand to buy is, where's the innovation? How do I grow this? Obviously distribution, that does, are there wins there that we could get that, they're not in certain channels where we could see, immediate growth. In terms of kind of a disruptor brand, that's a bit of a different calculus. I think it's harder. It's you're placing a bet. I think, to me, for a new brand to be really something people are going to want to take a look at, I think you kind of need to be in that $15 to $20 million net sale range for people to take it really seriously. You can have an incredible brand with incredible claims that's really small, and people are just like, I can't do anything here because there's not enough revenue to support the brand. But if you think about something that's kind of gotten that escape velocity, that's kind of mid-teens, maybe approaching 20 in net sales, and you're in a good category, it's growing, there's lots of hot spaces, whether it's sleep or women's health or other mental health areas. I mean, everybody wants to play in those spaces. So if you're in those areas and you start to see this brand kind of ticking up, and it's got to be the right kind of sales, right? I would not necessarily wait if it was all Amazon sales equally to something that was more omni. I feel like an omni brand might have more strength to it, or resilience, so to speak. So, that's what I think about. And then, again, how does this brand interface with the consumer? Is it too expensive? What other opportunities can I get to extend this? Can I create a franchise or an umbrella around a certain category to like extend the brand? That doesn't cannibalize. I mean, I've seen lots of small brands that have way too many SKUs, and their strategy has been like, oh, well, we got this SKU to a couple $1 million. Let's just launch another one, and that one does $2 million, and now all of a sudden they're sort of 15 million in sales, but they're 15 million in sales across 15 SKUs. And I was like, that's not a good thing either. You really got to press down. Does the brand respond to what you're doing? The marketing, the advertising, the consumer interface. Is the brand responding when you do something? Do you see some positive input, and do you know that that's working? Those are the kinds of things that I think about when I think about sort of disruptors or innovative brands.
Yeah. Good point there. You're preaching to the choir. We've talked about that a lot, Bruce, haven't we, about SKU proliferation and having 10, 15, having way too many SKUs. And there's a raspberry and a grape and a coconut and a watermelon, and they all do, like you said, $1 million.
Well, not only that, but the two things that we see all the time with smaller brands is too many SKUs and too many one-off deals. So you have a gazillion price points, and then you have a mess on your hands.
Yeah.
Okay, Rusty, so let's look at this from another angle. Let's say that an emerging brand, and you just gave one of the key kind of markers that you got to be in that 15 to $20 million range, ideally, to get attention. But anyone who's ever founded a brand or bought one out of the mausoleum and got it moving again, their dream is that they're going to grow this thing and sell it. So what counsel do you give these founders or owners about, hey, this is what you need to expect. This is not going to be something where we put the for sale sign in the lawn tomorrow, get 10 offers, and you're buying a Caribbean island in a week.
Yeah.
How do you counsel these guys and gals about how the process is going to go and what they should expect?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, many of the sort of initial calls that we have, it kind of leads to, hey, you need to wait. You're not there yet. And I know that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear like, oh, I've built this, brand, and, I got some press, and, I was in, I don't know, XYZ magazine, or, there's something that's sort of like, oh, I finally made it. And I hate having to say, well, you're not quite there yet. But unfortunately, that's kind of where it is. I mean, for most brands, I would say, and I don't mean this to be disparaging because I've never built a business like this, so I know it's infinitely hard, and I'm not trying to poke holes, but the reality is when I see a lot of smaller brands, what I see is people who've built a very nice small business, and they've got they kind of handle everything internally. They've got a couple of outsourced partners. They're starting to scale on Amazon a little bit. Maybe they got some DTC. Maybe they're in CVS, something like that. But it is a small business, and I definitely differentiate between a business and a brand. Brand to me is something where you start to develop this kind of consumer sentiment. Now it's pretty easy to see that sentiment. You can go and look at reviews. You start to see scan data that's picking up based on what you're doing with the brand, your advertising, your promotion, whatever spend you're doing, you're starting to drive conversion, you're driving repeat purchase, you're starting to get that ROI for the dollars spent. That to me is when you start to have a brand. And at that point, yes, it's very valuable because that is very hard to do. And, frankly, not many people ultimately are successful at it because it is so hard. So, when you sort of hit that level and you kind of start to check the boxes on those criteria, I would say you can absolutely, find a buyer for your brand. People will line up. What's much harder is finding a buyer for a small business. And people sort of see that, the multiples are out there. It's public. Everybody knows kind of, or thinks they know what these trade for. Like, oh, they trade for 2 to 4 times net sales. Well, okay, what's the difference between a 4 times and a 2 times? Well, a 2 times is a small brand that, maybe doesn't have great margin, maybe it's declining, or maybe it's got a lot of work to do to grow it. A 4 times is something with a great margin that's growing in a hot category, maybe has some protection around it, either through the format or some other IP or things like that. That's usually the differentiator. But I would say for most small brands, I think people kind of circle around sort of 2.5, 3.5 times net sales. I would say the multiples have pulled back a little bit post-COVID because it's not quite as frothy as consumers have kind of pulled back some of their spending, so we're not seeing the ramp up in growth as we once did. That said, that's kind of where I think I would counsel people is like, this is where usually things trade. Look, things do trade less than that all the time. But that's because there's a problem. Either there's low margin, or you've got a supply issue, or you've lost a retailer. Having those kinds of dings can really, really impact valuation. So that's kind of where I, just off the cuff, if I were to say, hey, if I had a small brand, that's got all the things going for it and needs to go into someone's hands that's bigger and better and can really supercharge it, that's kind of where I would sort of guide people to in terms of what their expectations do. Unfortunately, it's usually not private island money.
Yeah. Hey, Rusty, real quick, can you just touch a little bit about the timing of the process and a couple of steps? So let's say you get an inbound call or you make an outbound call to a brand that kind of fits your criteria. So you think the odds of it eventually selling are good. Can you just tell the folks, it's like, look, we're going to take on this assignment. We're going to need a bunch of data. We're going to put together a book. We're going to figure out who we're going to talk to. And, this is going to be a lot of work, folks. I'm going to ask you 10,000 questions. You're going to have a lot of meetings. A bunch of them will be dead ends, but hopefully not all of them. And this is going to take 9 months. Can you just give a little color around that, please?
Yeah, I would say, the timeline, if you're selling a brand, meaning really what you're selling is a trademark and effectively the inventory, so you're not selling a business, those can go much, much faster because there's just the diligence is less and it's just easier to get your head around. I would say, we usually sort of target kind of 5 to 6 months for something like that. We've done them faster. It really depends on how prepared people are. You're exactly right. If we initiate an engagement, the first thing we do is send people a long list of questions with a giant apology to say, sorry, but this is the information that we need so we can effectively represent the brand out in the market. Because look, as you know, this world is tiny. We're talking to the same people all the time. So the who to talk to, that's easy. That's probably the easiest part. But being able to credibly present a brand or a business, you do need all that support and data, because these are sophisticated people. These are people that have come out of big pharma that spent 20 years there, know more than I ever will about a brand or how to merchandise it or market it. And we need to be prepared for those questions. So that is a pretty intensive process that, frankly, a lot of small owners are not necessarily ready for. Bigger companies are, although you meet different challenges there because it's just getting the information out is sometimes harder. But I would say kind of that 5-6 month time frame, gathering the information, making sure we have the story right. We take a warts and all approach to like our diligence because we want to know everything. We want to know the bad stuff and the good stuff so that there's no surprises. And then when we start talking to people in the market, we can effectively represent the brand and talk about why this is such a good brand, why it's a good opportunity, what the growth prospects look like, what might a new owner do to supercharge that growth. Is it innovation? Is it distribution? Or are there synergies with their current portfolio? Things like that. That's part of the process. And then, as you rightly point out, we get to the meeting phase, and that's where we have to present the brand, and the owner usually has to speak up there to talk about the impetus behind the brand, why it is what it is, and what the growth prospects looks like. And then hopefully you have a partner at the end that you can contract with and get to close. But I would say all in 6 months is a good gauge.
All right. Well, thank you for that marker.
Awesome. So let's put your investor hat on. So what advice would you give an investor? What do you think an investor is looking for today in a brand? Is it the IP? Is it the brand? Is it the founder? Is it the product? What do you think investors are looking for in today's market?
I think investors should be looking for, many of the criteria that we've already outlined was, what category is this in? Is it a problem solution? Is there a path to omni, or is it already have pretty decent distribution? Is there's something unique about the brand? Is consumer sentiment strong, and can we grow that? How do we leverage that? Um, those are the kinds of things I think people should look at. I think for a lot of these sort of emerging smaller brands that, get kind of friends and family or angel investing, they tend to see a really sexy product and like, oh yeah, I love this product, so I'm going to invest. And it's like, well, you've sort of skipped over a lot of the stuff that makes a brand a brand. And, when the brand doesn't, sort of get there, I think that can be hard for people. So I really kind of always think about, what are the fundamentals? Is this brand necessary? Is it priced right? Is the distribution, appropriate, or can it get there? And then, obviously the team behind the brand is critical. It's like, have these people done it before? Is this someone who's got marketing, selling, distribution background that can drive growth, or is this an inventor? We've come across a lot of inventors that have developed really interesting brand concepts, but struggle to even get them to even, be more than a few $100,000 in sales, because it's just not their skill set. They're not marketeers, they're inventors, which is awesome and really, really, really cool. But it is a different skill set to sort of grow a brand versus invent.
Yeah. Great point. Yeah, we've seen a lot of what I call Bruce and I call mad scientists, right, Bruce?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I found this ingredient, and it's got the claims, or I can make these claims around this ingredient, and everybody's going to want this product, and look, it's going to be better than Tylenol, and it's $2 billion market opportunity. And it's like, yeah, but it's really hard to get there.
Well, and when you talk about the team and it doesn't mean that, I mean, everyone does something for the first time, right? It's like when people keep recycling baseball managers, I'm like, what are you doing? Guy's been fired 14 times, but he keeps getting jobs, so he has a good agent. But you've come across these inventors sometimes, especially in something like healthcare, and they may have a very elegant solution, but man, is it hard to explain. So
Yep.
the normal person's like, it's going to do what? So let's talk about what I would call a false start, Rusty. Can you talk to the group that might be a founder or running a very small company that one day might hope to transact? Can you talk a little bit about, you already said you had that $15 to $20 million marker that, you just might be too early, but talk about the risk of constantly testing the waters. I mean, we all see brands or hear rumors that such and such is for sale again. I mean, at some point, what does a guy like you in the business think if you hear that, Bruce's excellent company is for sale for the fourth time in 3 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a really interesting question, because it's always like, what kicks that off? And there's a million things that can kick off someone wanting to sell, age, retirement, whatever. They're tired, or they realize sometimes they have enough self-awareness to be like, this is as far as I can take this. It's better. I mean, I feel like those people are just more honest, and it's like, okay, if that's your realization, then we could probably get an outcome that's going to make you happy. What I think, you're kind of alluding to, is a different criteria, in that somebody has a brand in, I don't know, mental health or sleep or something like that, or I don't know, sports nutrition, and they see, call it a peer brand, meaning maybe they started the brands around the same time, they launched around the same time, but this peer brand like took off, it was successful, and it was bought by Unilever for $1 billion, or $500 million. That puts crazy stars in people's eyes, because the first thing everyone says is, our brand is better, we can make claims, ours tastes better, all this stuff. Like, we're so much better than that brand, I should be worth that much too. And like, well, gosh, let's sort of unpack that and think about why did someone get paid that, and what were the components of that brand that allowed it to be valuable. Um, I would say 7 times out of 10, people don't want to hear that. They don't listen to that, and they just kind of tune that out. So they said, we want to go to market. We're worth 5 times sales because this brand that's similar also got 5 times sales, and we want to go down that path. And I see a lot of people do that, and then they don't get the benchmark that they want, or they sort of realize like, oh, I didn't have all my ducks in a row before we launched the process. And you do see them kind of, as you rightly said, perpetually for sale. Always with a for sale sign hanging out. I mean, they're trying to build the brand, but at the same time try to sell it. And I think that's really tough because a sale process is not easy. It is super time consuming. It's 100% of your time. So it's 100% of your time. You also need to spend 100% of your time growing the brand. So it's easy to start to miss. It's easy to start to see a brand slip if you're spending all of your time engaging with parties and having these one-off conversations and over and over and over. So yeah, it can be detrimental for sure. And the worst part is, once you present a brand to folks, if it doesn't go through, you turn around and try and sell it again 3 months later, 6 months later. If the story has not substantially changed, basically people will be like, oh, we saw this last year. Like we weren't interested then, we're not interested now. Like they don't even give you a second look. So you really got to watch out for that. I'm not saying it's always, leads to a dead end, but it's hard to turn people's attention when they feel like they already know the answer.
Yeah, the other thing that we see, Rusty, your example is a good one. So if a brand transacts for a big number, let's just say $1 billion, which is 5 times sales, and their competitors now think they should get the same, what they don't understand or want to admit is that price was just paid by an aggressive buyer. And that might have been the only buyer that was super aggressive, saying, I've got to be in that category. And then, that gives other people pause, and they're like, man, I can't make that offer and take it to my management. They'll think I'm insane. So the minute something transacts, you've taken a big buyer off the table.
For sure. For sure.
Absolutely.
Tracy?
Absolutely. So, Rusty, tell us a little bit about maybe the most creative deal you've seen involving a small emerging brand.
You sent that question across, and I'm struggling to think about creativity in emerging brand. I think, what we see more often than not, and I don't think this is creative or even all that, sexy, is, you see a lot of deferred sort of consideration. So if a brand is small, if it's, emerging, maybe it's not there yet, but it has all the right characteristics to get there. We've structured lots of deals where it's, well, maybe the founder retains some equity stake and gets equity stake in the larger company. So there's some upside there, and that's sort of built on like, hey, this brand is going to, help your overall business grow. But, a component that's deferred, meaning, if you hit certain milestones around revenue or distribution or things like that, or, new product launch, the owner or the founder gets more money. We've seen that a lot. I mean, those can be complicated. I think the devil's in the details as to making sure that, founders get their money, because there's lots of ways you don't get your money. But I would say that sort of, to me, is like one of the more, I don't know that I call it creative, because it's done by lots of people, but that is something people should think about when going into a process. Is have an openness to sit in the buyer's shoes and say, okay, I'm buying this brand, I'm paying some money, but I, buyer, have to invest a lot of money. And, I often hear from people, well, oh, well, they're bare. They'll just put it in their distribution, then it's going to grow. It's like, no, it's not how it works. And if someone
Mhm.
paid for that, they're going to lose their job. So the reality is they have an infrastructure that is very expensive, that they built up over time. They're putting your brand in. Should you, seller, get credit for their infrastructure? No. It needs to be a balance to say, okay, if we can, help drive sales or meet certain milestones, um, then you can get, kind of another bite of the apple or more consideration. But a lot of people sort of think like, oh, well, they're just gonna distribute it to every Walgreens, Walmart, CVS. So, the brand is worth $1 billion to them, so that's what I should get. And it's like, no, that's not really how people think about it. So kind of just backtracking and saying, look, there's probably I don't know, I wouldn't call it a middle ground, but a solution where you get some money up front, you do get some other carrots when, the brand hits certain milestones. That can sometimes be to use your word, creative way to solve a problem.
All right.
Interesting. Interesting. So, Rusty, as we head toward the end here, a couple of personal interest questions to wrap up. So, as you sit in your chair there, who's had the greatest influence on your career? Why, and what did this person, do for you that, you look back and you're like, man, that was really helpful.
It's a guy. He may not even remember me, but it was one of my first sort of real jobs post college. I worked at a think tank in DC, just a very low level kind of admin role, but I got to be around the president of the organization a lot, and I always remember, he was very, very smart, PhD, economics, worked on the Council of Economic Advisors. I mean, just this crazy resume that, was awe-inspiring. And I always remember no matter who he talked to, whether it was someone like me who was a 21-year-old, new to the workforce, or someone who was, even more accomplished than he always gave them a lot of attention and talked to them and showed that he was listening, asked good questions and engaged. And as a result, like I could see, you know, whether it was whoever it was someone they just sort of immediately trusted him, respected him, and just sort of realized like that's the way to interact with people. Show that you listen and try to be helpful and thoughtful, and it doesn't really matter if they're, you know, more junior to you or and maybe even by many years. Showing people that attention can have a real impact on them, and so I do try to do that. Can't say I do it as good as he did, but I've carried that with me for sure.
That's awesome. I
Well,
love that.
that's good because there's nothing that's a bigger turnoff than someone who thinks they're the smartest person in the room, cutting people off all the time. And, that's when you start looking at your watch like, when will this be over so I can leave?
Yeah, I hope I'm never that guy.
No.
Awesome. All right, one last fun question. Your favorite band and
Uh,
why?
okay. So, I complain to my friends of a certain age that there's no more good rock and roll.
True.
It just I don't know where it went, but I think about all the bands that I grew up with, and it's hard to pick a favorite, but I remember being exposed to like a Led Zeppelin the first time. I was like, wow, this is it. This is rock and roll. So probably somebody from my era that still listen to and love. I'd say it has to be Nirvana. They rock, and I can't
I
get
love
can't get
it.
away from it.
Well, I always wonder, personalities aside from John Bonham, and then, Pink Floyd just sold their music
Yes,
collection.
I
I think
saw
it was
that.
announced today for $400 million. I just don't understand why you wouldn't tour one more time. I
That'd
mean,
be
you could
awesome.
knock down so much cash. I mean, they'd have to call Rusty Ray to organize that whole thing.
I love it.
Rusty, thank you so much for coming on today's show. Very informative on both
Yes.
ends, buyers, sellers, kind of demystifying some of the process here. So, Tracy, take us into the big finish.
All right. Well, first of all, Rusty, tell our audience how they can get a hold of you.
Well, you can reach me by email, rusty.ray@alantra.com. That's spelled ALANTRA.com. I'm always happy to chat with folks. I'm on LinkedIn. I'll be honest, probably not the best LinkedIn user, but that's always one way too.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Rusty. Again, it was very insightful, and I know our audience is really going to enjoy listening to this episode. So again, please follow us on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, as well as our LinkedIn page at Road, the number 2 Retail. Thanks, and be careful out there.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Thanks again, Rusty. Good luck out there, folks.
Take care.